All right, this episode is about a topic that a lot of runners get stuck on, and that is paces, training zones, recovery, and especially around training for a goal race time that you're striving for. And I'm a great use case to use to walk through this because I don't have a lot of recent race data to go off of. I was 20 years old, and I ended up doing a 4:18 time with very little structure, basically running everything at one pace, no strength training, underfueled, and honestly just figuring it out as I went. And before we talk about current training paces, it helps a little bit to look at the race data I do have. These are my actual PRs across different distances and different years. When we look at results like this, we can use them to correlate to marathon equivalent and predict performance. Something else that's important in context is how I've been running the last couple of years. Most of my running has been pretty casual, and that usually lands in what we call no man's land. It's not quite slow enough to really build the aerobic engine and not fast enough to push threshold. And the data has made it really clear that even though I want to race faster than I ever have, that's actually going to come from me running slower than I ever have. My A goal is to run around a 3:45 marathon or just go sub 4. And that's the outcome if everything comes together in my training and on race day. My B goal is to run a PR, so under 4:18, regardless of the exact time. And my C goal is just to have fun and soak in the experience of Boston. As I've moved through the training cycle, what has become clear is that these goal paces are sitting at a pretty achievable point right now. Not guaranteed, not forced, but possible with the right plan and the patience to build toward them. But here's the important part. Just because that's the goal doesn't mean that's what I should be training at right now. You always want to train based on current fitness, not an arbitrary future goal. Fitness improves with training, but you get there by respecting where your system's at today. There's plenty of pace predictors and calculators out there, and they can all be useful reference points, but none of them replace good old exercise physiology. At the end of the day, effort and how your body responds, especially through RPE and heart rate, tell you far more than a single predicted time. So to tighten this up for myself, I did a 5K time trial this week. I averaged about a 7:34 pace, and that's important context because on paper, that effort does correlate with a marathon in the 3:45 range. So this isn't a case of the goal being unrealistic. The issue is how my body is responding right now. What we're seeing is that my heart rate is relatively efficient at higher speeds. It doesn't jump dramatically from easy into steady or threshold. But at truly easy paces, my heart rate is still higher than we'd like. That tells us my aerobic system isn't as efficient yet at the low end. And if I start forcing faster paces before that aerobic base is more developed, then it won't make me fitter. It'll just add fatigue. And because heart rate alone is also not what we want to totally rely on, we also gauge RPE. And for me, what I have found is that my RPE does tend to be lower. So my perceived effort does tend to be lower to what my heart rate says. So instead of chasing the paces I want to run later, we're focusing on making the easy work more efficient first. Because the fastest marathon pace you can run is the fastest pace that you can hold while staying primarily aerobic. You don't get there by forcing speed, you get there by building the system underneath it. RPE is my main anchor. Heart rate helps confirm what my body is telling me. For most runners, marathon effort sits around 78 to 85% of your max heart rate. My max heart rate is about 195 plus, which puts marathon effort roughly between 153 and 165 beats per minute. If I'm running something that's supposed to be marathon effort, but my heart rate is already creeping into the 160s or 170s, then that's not marathon work, that's threshold stress. So instead of chasing a perfect zone model, we look at effort, heart rate response, and recovery trends together. Goal pace still matters, just later in the cycle. Right now, we're training at what my cardiovascular system supports today and letting future paces emerge over time. And a big reason for that is also injury risk. The research consistently shows that runners who spend about 70 to 80% of their training at truly easy intensities not only perform better, but tolerate training better. That very famous 80-20 rule isn't just about optimizing training adaptation, but it's also about respecting injury risk. Injury isn't always the primary outcome in those studies, but injury risk clearly increases when intensity creeps too high too often. Overuse injuries are strongly linked to load mismanagement, especially when repeated moderate to hard efforts without recovery. Speed work has to be intentional, not generic. And speed work isn't about getting fast, it's about making marathon pace cheaper and more controlled. So speed work improves running economy by improving your coordination, which makes slower paces cost less in energy. That's one way we bring heart rate down on easy runs over time. It also kind of raises the heart rate ceiling, so by improving VO2 max and threshold so that your marathon pace sits lower and feels more sustainable. And mechanically, speed work also helps by maintaining stiffness and elastic return and gives you that spring in your stride that matters later in the race. Strength is still a big part of this build and something I've always wanted to prioritize because we know how important it is for runners. That said, I've had to make some adjustments. I originally started this cycle with 2 strength days, 1 heavier, 1 lighter, plus Pilates. I'll be honest, I had high hopes that my body would tolerate that like it did in my 20s, but the feedback was clear. My legs were just feeling heavier than I wanted on my runs. And maybe that's because my recovery after long runs has looked a little bit different these days. So we adapted. I've cut back to 1 heavier strength session and 1 Pilates session. That change alone has left me feeling fresher on runs, and this is a good example of keeping the main thing the main thing. Strength training is meant to support running, and it does, but in this phase of the training cycle, it's something that has to be carefully managed and not pushed. The plan is to continue with 2 sessions per week, strength and Pilates until about 8 weeks out, and then transition to 1 session per week for maintenance and recovery. Right now, my strength work is also a little less focused on heavy max strength and more on power and plyos. So again, fewer heavy sessions, more recovery. Strength should support running and not steal from it, right? So the biggest takeaway here is that there's no one size fits all approach to choosing training paces and a training plan. What work depends on your history, your fitness, your recovery, and how your body is responding, not just what a calculator says. That's why adapting matters, adjusting strength, adjusting load, and listening to feedback so that training supports recovery instead of fights it. It's also why working with a coach matters, someone who can look at the full picture and not just the numbers, because your goal pace is an outcome and it shouldn't be an input. Right now, I'm training the system I have, managing load and building durability so that later I can earn the paces that I want.